In this video, we're talking about another type of object like tables and triggers that you store in a database, and they're called views. And views sound complicated, but they're really not. Views are really named select statements. They're often talked about in more complicated ways, but that's really what they are. So as an example, if we're using the same table that we talked about before, we have the table students and the table log. And let's say one thing that we're really often needing to do is we're needing to figure out the student's name and when they joined the class. So how would you do that? Well, you would join these two tables together using the ID and student ID as the way to match these rows together. So how would you write that? Well, you would say select students.name log.time inserted from students inner join log on students.id log.student_id. And what this would give you back is this table that has two columns, name and time inserted, with data from both of those other tables. And that's a great select query, but what happens if you need to run the select query a lot? It's a pain typing in that huge select query all the time. So what you can do is you can say create a view with a given name, which is called name and time, as whatever that select statement is. And now you basically have the select statement with this really convenient name called name and time. And in fact, SQL makes it really easy to use that view, name and time, use that select query a lot like as if it was its own table. So a view is what's called a virtual table. It's not a real table, but it looks like a table. And it's the result set of a select statement. It's all of the rows returned by a select statement. A view has rows and columns just like a table, but instead of holding data, it just points at data held in other tables. And you can treat a view like a table, and you can do select statements off of views. However, one big rule here, the big rule, is that views cannot be modified. You're not allowed to insert, update, or delete views because they're not really tables. There's no real data to change in a view. It's just pointing at data elsewhere. And so you can use a view like it's a temporary table, like it's a table that you built just for this purpose. And so you can build the view from multiple other tables with joins and filters and group bys and all of that things to make anything you can stick in a select statement, you can make a view out of. And the important thing to note, and this is really useful, if the view's select statement changes, meaning the rows that would be returned by the select statement change because, for instance, you added rows to various tables and things like that, the view automatically changes as well. The view is a live select statement that's running whenever you try to use the view. Okay, so let's look up an example for this. So let's say I'm working on trying to figure out, well, who are all of the artists and albums in my Chinook music database like you guys have been working with in the homework. So I create a view, it's called artists and albums as, and here is my select statement. Give me the artist name and the album title and the album ID from, and then I join the artist table with the album data joining on the artist ID, which is in common between those two tables. So I have this nice view called artist.albums. And this might be just what I want. Maybe I just want to return this. I want to just do select star from artist and albums. That will work fine. That will give me all of the artist names, album titles, and album IDs in my database. But let's say, you know what? I realize I actually really hate Kanye West. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new view called good artists and albums where I want to select star. I want to select all the rows from artist and album. I'm selecting from the previous view because you can use views just like their tables, and I say where not name like Kanye with if it has the letters Kanye in somewhere in the name column, then it's right out. And so now I have this view that is my good artists and albums. And you know what? Let's say, it's not the artists and albums I really care about. What I really care about are the tracks in those albums. So I would say create view called good tracks as, and I say select tracks.star. So give me all of the columns in all the track related columns from the table tracks, inner join on good artists and albums on tracks.albumid equals good artists and albums.album ID. And so this will give me all of the tracks from all of the albums in my database that don't have the name Kanye in the artist column. And so, no, I mean, this is a pretty complicated query. Give me all of the content regarding the tracks who are made by artists that aren't Kanye. And this select statement would be rather large, involving multiple joins, involving multiple where clauses and things like that. Actually, I guess there's only one where clause, but it's still a messy, complicated query. And so what did I do? I broke it up into subparts by using views. So I basically did one view that does part of my query, and then I used that view and modified it to make another view that gets a little closer to where I want, and then I used that view to make another view that gets the query that I actually care about. And so this is a common way to use views, to basically break apart complicated queries into kind of these sub-select statements that get you closer to what you want. And you can always output the view to look at the view and make sure the data is what you're expecting. So when should you use views? Well, when you want a read-only table made from data in other tables. That's really their only use case. They're often used to hide complexity. For instance, complicated joins. If you need to do a whole bunch of joins, use views to kind of like break it up into smaller bits as you work your way there. It's also useful for customizing the data. So you can use functions and group by and complicated things to make a view that has the data in the form you want, even if you don't want to actually put your data, make a table in your data with that exact schema. And it allows you to have different ways of viewing the same data without data duplication, because it's really not duplicating data, it's just data stored elsewhere, presented in a nice fashion. However, to note, views are not free. Every time you try to use a view, it's really under the table running that select statement. And so if that select query is hard to do, if it involves a very complicated join with many rows and many orderings and things like that, it can really slow down your view. So even though it looks like, oh, I'm just selecting all the rows from this view, if the select statement that generates the view is complicated, things will make it slow. All right, the other thing to note is how long do views live? Now, a view only lives as long as the tables exist that are in its select statement. So what this means is if the tables that are in its select statement are dropped, the view is also dropped. And this is, once again, another reason, be very careful when dropping tables because it can break other things. Another thing you can do is you can actually use the word temporary to say, hey, this view shouldn't even live as long as the tables exist. It should automatically be dropped when the current connection to the database is closed, meaning that you made the view for the purpose of this connection. Database, don't bother keeping it around after I'm done with it. So the way that you do that is you say create temporary view something as select star from students. So you have that temporary keyword to say delete me when my connection closes. However, you can also remove view manually using the drop view if you want to do that as well. All right. So one kind of tricksy thing that some people do with views is they still want to be able to change views. They want to be able to add rows to a view or change rows in a view or delete rows from a view. But views don't support that. So how do you do that? Well, you can cheat by using triggers. So you can attach triggers to a view just like a table. However, one limitation is you can't do before and after triggers because they would never activate. You're never actually able to update a view or insert a view or delete a view. But what you can do is you can use the instead of triggers. Now, what does that look like? It's used to cheat. It's like a trick. It's used to make views look like they're mutable, look like you can change them like tables. So what would that look like? Well, let's say I want to allow people to update my view. Okay, my view is called cool tracks. And so I make a little trigger called update on cool tracks, and it says instead of updating on cool tracks, because somebody's like, I'm trying to change the cool tracks view, and it's like, no, you can't actually do that. But instead, I'm going to do this trigger, and what this trigger is going to do is going to update tracks set the tracks name equal to the new dot name when tracks.id is equal to new.trackid. So if somebody is trying to change the name of a track in cool tracks, this instead of trigger will activate and change the underlying real table, the table tracks. And so then it will look like, hey, look, I just actually changed the cool tracks view, because when they run the view again, they'll see the underlying table has changed and it did what you wanted. So if you need to present a view and you want to provide the illusion that this view is mutable, you can use, instead of triggers, to change the underlying data as necessary. Now, once again, this is a bit elaborate and this is kind of a small use case, but this is a very useful use case if you're working with somebody who you want to give them access to the view and you want to allow them to manipulate the data that's part of the view. This is how you would do it.